Go for it.
Okay. Well, welcome to this webinar. This is the second webinar of the year presented by IVRPA, the International Virtual Reality Professionals Association. We are the only international organization focused on VR, XR creatives, primarily providing educational resources to our members and others through webinars like this, an annual in-person conference, and content on our website. I'm Scott Whitty. I have the honor of being president of this year's IVRPA Board of Directors. Other directors are in the background working to make this actually happen. And our newest director, Loren Ybarrondo, is leading this webinar, and he will be leading, or he'll be in charge of webinars moving into the future. Again, this is our second webinar of 2023. We plan to hold one per month, usually the last Saturday of each month. Those attending today will get email notices of upcoming webinars, and this webinar is being recorded and will be available online. We will email links to everybody in the next few days. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button. You can ask questions there, and we will try to get to them as we're able to. If you want to voice a question live, then in the chat section, click the raise hand, and we'll try to get to you that way, and then you can actually do it by voice. So without further ado, let's get going, and I'll turn this over to Loren Ybarrondo, and the rest of us can just turn off our video and we'll disappear, and that will probably be for the best.
Okay,
Loren.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Loren Ybarrondo. I'm going to give a presentation today with a sneak peek at some of the work I'm doing for the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, and also kind of a general discussion on best practices. So I'm going to invite everybody to please, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have examples of your own as I go through and talk about best practices, please put them in the chat and QA as I start to formulate our future webinars. That will give me an idea of what the interest is out there. So at the bottom, you'll see I have my email, phone number. Please contact me. There's two websites there. The first one, Visual Construction, is more of the VR and technical work. I also really enjoy wildlife photography. And so the second one there, the ybarrondo.com, points to a SmugMug site. So I also have a number of links. So I'm just going to share. I'm sharing my desktop right now. If at any time I get out of sync with things, just let me know. But the topics I'll cover, the intro and bio, I'll show my first big project that I worked on and talk about how I've progressed. I'll quickly get to what is called the ecosystem of immersive content creation. I'm curious about what people are working on. It's not, I do a lot of museum VR type stuff, architectural, but there's 360 video and all kinds of stuff. I'll then talk about the Smithsonian Virtual Tours that have been up for about 15 years. It started in 2007. I'm going to do very high level through these things because the work that I'm going to show you for the air and space is kind of a work in progress. It'll change as time goes on. And about 2 months from now, we'll have a webinar where I'll talk about the Smithsonian, and I'll include very interesting. I'll get the traffic numbers and data so you can see what this website has, its actual performance metrics, and also the air and space that's been public for about a month, but in 2 months, I'll have good traffic from that as well. Then, of course, I'll get to the virtual air and space. And again, I really want to encourage an open technical exchange on what constitutes best practices. I won't be presenting, the best practices, because it probably should always be in air quotes, because they're always changing, especially in a technology that moves as fast as ours. And then we'll end with the draft webinar schedule, kind of and I don't have it filled out, maybe the next 2-3 months, I got a good idea about. So getting now into where did I start from? Where did I get introduced to this? My first big project is in Austin, Texas. I'm working for IBM Research as a mechanical engineer, and it's a wonderful place, a beautiful cafeteria, and they encourage collaboration amongst So there's a lot, I see a lot of other technologies. At lunchtime, I'm being introduced to all kinds of neat stuff that's going on because this is their research headquarters for enterprise research. And I'm introduced something called IBM Hot Media, and it's a Java-based method of displaying and weaving and working with the old QuickTime VRs. And at that time, I had been fascinated with geographic information systems and terraforming and environment, called environmental CAD or environmental rendering now. I still play around with it. I use a program called View now, but back then it was Mojo World and Bryce 3D and things like that. I became fascinated with this and had this concept of using satellite imagery. It's basically what Street View and Google View were. And I'm going to switch now to just popping to the, I'll show you what, and you can still see you're seeing the interface hopefully now. Let me know if you don't. And so you had satellite imagery that I'd gotten from Keyhole Incorporated, and you could zoom in, and it's crude, but this is from about 1999, 2000. And so the satellite imagery, this is the Pennybacker Bridge in Austin, Texas. And you click on it now, the panoramas don't work anymore because they were the old QuickTime, but I converted them over to equirectangular, and then they're in HTML5. They were originally cylindrical. That's why they have such a huge nadir there. But you can see it was kind of a neat concept. It didn't really take off. I ended up going back to school, which is a good thing. And I should be back on the presentation now, because in going back to school, and I went to Georgia Tech and continued my work in mechanical engineering. But because of my introduction to virtual reality, I became interested in what's called computer-aided geometric design. And it's the foundational mathematics and theories that feed into the organic side would be all the video games and stuff that you get produced that way. The direction I had gone for about 14 years was the feature-based or the CAD. And so I got into finite element analysis and introduced to lasers. And that was good because I started to understand that this world we work in, this XR, includes all kinds of stuff. And there's a really famous document. It's from 2015, and it's a venture capitalist report. So it's Goldman Sachs writing a report about virtual and augmented reality for its investors. Its predictions are for 2025, about 2 years away. And unless we make a whole lot of money in the next 2 years, we're falling short of their projections. But that's common for this. But I'm hoping that if you look at this, if you could tell me where you sit in this ecosystem, what are you interested in? Are there people that are doing 3D sound, stereophonic sound, and all that kind of stuff? Or not stereophonic, but I forget what it's called. Anybody working on head-mounted devices or cave systems or displays? I know we have some people that do software development that are making authoring packages. Do we have people that are making plugins or widgets or things like that for KR Pano and Garden Gnome and those? Let me know. Let me know what you'd be interested in, because that will drive what we hold webinars on. So after I had gone back to school, was working for the US Navy as an engineer, I rose up to where I became a manager over some systems, and I was the training of those systems became a requirement. I got introduced to reintroduced to virtual and augmented in the US Navy. And at about 2007, I started the first virtual tour for the Smithsonian, and it was created with EasyPano TourWeaver. And I taught myself how to use it, and it was a nice package. I liked it, but it was limited in its ability to open up information, to display things. And one of the primary lessons that I've learned over these years of working on this project is when you have a committed client, that makes a big difference. You have to have a committed client, but the committed client is, if they believe in the product, then they're always pulling, they're always wanting more, and that's important. And one of the biggest pulls or things that the Smithsonian has always wanted is that this thing be functional, it be useful, it have purpose. The the eye candy and the wow factor, as we all know, they fade pretty quickly. And so if it doesn't have usefulness to them, so they've driven, the Google Analytics tracking at the interaction level. The current thing that they're really pushing on is the ability to change it themselves, the ability to swap information out. The other lesson, well, in 2011, I starting to customize it myself and using Kohler's PanoTour Pro. It would author things for you. And so you could create a stripped down tour, add some feature to it, have it export out the finished tour, and then go into the code and learn from it. And so there was a transition period. Like everybody else, I was, pretty sad when they went out of business, but that also forced me to switch completely to something like KR Pano, or because of the demands of the client. They were always wanting customization or having it branded to match up with their stuff. And you just had to end up customizing yourself. Now, that was in 2021, and I'll show an example from that. That's the first piece where the information is added, where it starts to connect to the Smithsonian databases or connection. It doesn't actually connect yet. And that's kind of where I'm at now in 2023 with the version I'll show you. It's very robust. It's meeting accessibility requirements and things. They really like it. But now they want to take control of it. They want to, you got Neil Armstrong's birthday coming up. They want to be able to go in there and put hotspots around his stuff. And I'm almost gone back to full circle, or am I going to have to put them into an authoring package, teach them how to use Garden Gnome or something in order to maintain the content like that? Something to work out. Last two things that I've kind of learned over these years, and then I'll get into showing some of these examples, is that when you're passionate about this, and this is a passionate kind of work, it's an art form. We all love to work on this stuff. It's new. You're always a little bit out of sync with your client, and you have to be very patient about, managing their expectations and, when bugs pop up and things like that, and that it's a business. It's got to be run like a business, but art sells, so it has to be artistic as well. So let me get into now, kind of setting the context for the discussion webinar that we'll have next month, and inviting you to participate now in this as well, as best practices. And I'm just going to cover two. The first one would be how do you embed supplemental content, or what happens when you click on the hotspot? What pops up? Is it just a static image? How does it pop up? You have text in there, things like that. And these are a couple ways over the years that I've found that they've been useful. They've turned out to be kind of useful ways of displaying information. They're all based on VR technology. They appear to be flat, but virtual reality, some of the techniques, the ability to stream large images, to tile them, multi-tiling, they apply in other ways. And I've also found that if I design a virtual tour in a modular format, that I have the ability to, the pieces that you're going to see here, though they pop up as an interaction in a virtual tour, they also sit on a standard website, a WordPress website or whatever, as an iframe. That information, it's a standalone HTML5 web piece. So I'll go ahead and hop over now I won't click on these links. Afterwards, I'll put a PDF of this presentation up so you can go through and play with these yourself. They're all live and pretty expansive. But I'm going to switch back over to the first link that I would click on. It brings up, this is a gigapixel image. It's created this is an exhibit inside the Pentagon, commemoration of the Vietnam War. It spans about 300 feet of the A ring, which would be the interior ring, the ring next to the inner courtyard. And these are not photos, but all modern exhibits, museums, just about anything will have mock-ups or planning documents. They're usually vector-based. In this case, they were Adobe Illustrator. And you have the ability to export out of those photographic imagery and pull them into Photoshop and alter them, but eventually they end up becoming a gigapixel, like some stitched gigapixel of a city. This one pushes the limits of Photoshop. It's about 5,000 pixels high, but it covers the entire Vietnam War from its entire history from 45 to 75. So this image is about 220,000 pixels long. And I have a search capability on it, just using, because it's a flat piece of VR, I can integrate buttons and things on it just as if it's, standard immersive virtual tour. And this, I'm using one of the plugins, the KRPano Fuzzy Logic Search. I'm just going to type in, like bomb, and I can pull up, any of these. It's all of the items that have it. And it's searching off of descriptions or tagged locations that I've placed along here. So I set up fake scenes. It gets complicated, but we can have discussions about that. But what that does is it will take you to any spot. The images in this are very, very large. These are, massive images that you can zoom in an entire timeline. Because it's used for academic purposes, again, functionality is important. Students who may want to pull out this particular task, they have a camera feature. It's not a screenshot, but an actual extraction that extracts 3,000 by 2,000, very simple, pops it out, then they can save it to their desktop. And this is a 3,000 by 2,000 pixel image. So I'm going to hop back just to show you the presentation. There's another one in there you can take a look at. It's the history of the TSA. That one is a series of glassed etched walls that wrap around their headquarters. Again, they existed as mock-up graphics. And instead of taking photographs of something, you just export out the vector version of it. The next one we'll show you is another way to, if you're popping up information, and this is the image carousel. This swap back. And please let me know if I haven't heard anybody, but is everything working good, Scott? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
everything's working fine.
Okay, good. I'll keep going in. So jump to the next one. If you click on that, it brings up, so these run as standalone, but within the virtual tour, they're a hotspot that pulls them up in a light box that's, flexible or fluid to whatever the device they're using is. This is TSA headquarters in Springfield, Virginia, a new building they built. It's really magnificent. And it has in it a place called Mission Hall, which is a mini museum exhibit, kind of for employee morale. So it has the uniform. This is, they have a number of mannequins that show the various uniforms of the TSA service. And so just want to show you is that this, I can scroll through the images. They've all been cut out, placed on a common background. So it has a nice fluid flow to it. They're all, very large images so the person can zoom in. You could annotate these if you wanted. Redundancy, when I'll talk about accessibility here in a moment, but redundancy, different ways of doing the same thing is important. So you have a scroll list the person can select. Perhaps they're wanting to read a description about it. You have this ability to pull down a description that now that they're reading a description and as you cycle through, the descriptions change. But you'll notice the gap here. In a later version, I have the window changing because one of these, the script, see, like something like here, if you don't see the scroll bar right away, and the sentence ends just right, you don't know that there's more. So in another version of this, I had the window scrolling open, and I'll show you that just in a second. The last one, again, on this slide, the last link, searchable content, is kind of a combination of both of these, taking gigapixel images and then putting them into a carousel. And on this, this is the Deep Time exhibit, Natural History Museum. It's the project that precedes the Air and Space. And along the way in which this is kind of a demonstration also of the way in which you add the hotspots. In this case, in front of every exhibit, they call these informational rails. They're at a 45-degree angle. So you come up to the exhibit and you look down and all the information and they're called information rails. These are all also available as vector graphics, all exported out. But here you can see that it's becomes very intuitive to you that each of these is interactive, and that you can click on these. It brings up extremely high resolution and beautiful. I mean, they're vectors. There's no way you could take a photograph of these panels or exhibit and get this clean of text. And also not the file size either. These are pretty small file sizes. But here you'll see that I have this description, and then now as I move through the panels, that window, that textual window is scrolling. So I'm not having to scroll. That's a really important change in the interaction, the user, they call it user experience. And so when I'm talking about best practices, this is an older one in which, I have I won't get into the details of that, but you'll notice that I've got two close symbols right next to each other. That may not be the best idea. Let me get to now back to the presentation, hopping onto the second best practice that I wanted to just quickly cover. And I definitely won't go into the depths on this because this could be an entire webinar, is the concept of accessibility. Very simple. If you are a public entity, you have, you're a hotel, a college, a restaurant, something like that, and you have to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? So you got parking spaces, ramps, elevators, things like that. The internet is also part of your infrastructure. And if you have what they call public facing information, especially if you're a government agency, that information has to be accessible. The guidelines that govern that are what's called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I've taken this graphic from a nice document, and then the guidelines themselves are in the two links on this page. For us, the one that right now is a difficulty is the keyboard control. And that's really just because the software or the keyboard control hasn't been added yet. It's not difficult to add, but at the programming level, if you're the person developing KRPano or Garden Gnome, it's not going to be difficult to incorporate that feature. It's just the requirement hasn't been met yet. Another one that will trip up VR projects is the one at the lower left there, the readability. And it's not clarity. That's not the contrast or color, stuff like that. It's the, does it make sense? Is it intuitive? Are the button, and that can be a really subjective one. That's where in the TSA version, I have the requirement was put on me kind of at the end, and I hadn't built it into the start. And so I had to use a third-party overlay, which provided accessibility. And so you'll see what that means here in just a second. But it didn't allow, it had one logic flaw where if I selected out of a menu a scene and went to that scene, I had to go back to that menu to select another scene. And in the virtual tour, of course, if I'm in a scene or panorama, I have an arrow that takes me to the adjacent one, to the next one. That, they said, it wasn't intuitive to a person. And so that had to be reprogrammed in. So let me hop to now, quick introduction of the virtual air and space. Sorry if I teased you for a long time here, but right in the current scope of it is the mall. There's two air and space museums, the Mall Museum, and then the one out at Dulles International Airport, the Udvar Hazy Center. The mall building is under a complete renovation, a $1 billion plus renovation. They have 8 new galleries that have been completely done, and you're seeing them right here. I've completed the photography for those, and it was really neat in that, again, having a committed client, they had the window of time between when the exhibits were completely completed, the custodial staff had cleaned them, and then they were about to have their press tours where people would come in. They gave me a small window where I could go in, and I was able to film the museum in its absolute pristine condition. It had just been built, not a fingerprint anywhere. And so of course, I've gone back there now and it doesn't look like that after a couple of months. So it's pretty neat that they're doing that. The What I'm going to show you now, though, is just the first gallery has been published, Destination Moon. The next one, Wright Brothers, is done, probably be published next week. I'll talk about this. It's very important that when you produce projects like this, that you give them in the granular and you put them out there in little pieces, because you get this pulse of traffic. And if you put the entire virtual tour out at once, you'll just get the same amount of traffic. And this time, it's going to be 8 times that traffic. So let me go ahead and switch now back to this open window I've got. And I'm going to, so this is running off of my site, just to make sure. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to click on this Destination Moon. I'm into now this tour. And like I said, it's a bit of a work in progress. I'll show you some of the kind of the nice features that are done. One, I'd learned over time that if you place a hotspot, no matter how much you make it contrast or make it stand out, people can lose it. If this, in this case, I'm using a leader or a small PNG graphic that's transparent. The leader is attached to the object at one end, but the actual label or whatever is attached to the other. So as I move it, you'll see a relative motion between it. So it really pops out that that's a hotspot. I also, any zooming or whatever would, really picks it up. You'll notice I roll over it, I have it changing. And this is also all being done with CSS. As an accessibility issue, we want to stay away from embedding meaningful text into graphics. It's kind of a 101 for that one. If I click on it now, this right now is just sized for a mobile. I haven't made this fluid yet. I'm just playing around with some of the functionality, and I know that scares the Smithsonian because they've already published a piece, but things change. So here you have a pop-up. One of the things to realize is that when you pop up an image, a description of an image, you should have the image there as well. And then you have all the text in here. This is the same text that's in that accessibility. I'll show you the accessibility version here in just a second, really quickly. But I want to show you an important feature is that all of the text, and of course, is all written in code. I can translate it. And so I'm clicking a translate to Spanish. All of the textual information is now converted over. It's not a pure transcription. A truly professional, you would have the actual Spanish transcripts that would be loaded, but this is very powerful. And then it's also changed all of the interfaces and stuff. I'm going to pull up the user controls and just kind of get back to the concept of accessibility. I'm in the process of, let me switch it back to, so back to these user controls. I'm slowly adding in the functionality. I'm a little bit stuck on the menu system. I'm using a plugin menu system that is not keyboard accessible. I've talked to the author on that one a little bit. Maybe we can come up with a way to control that. And the overlay that's popped up here, the image behind it is still active, and so I can hit the F key and pop to the next panorama. So I can go backwards and forwards through them, and so I'm getting close to it. But if you were accessing this with an assistive device and a reader, and on a Safari, you have the ability to simulate that by going under View, Show Reader. This is what you would see. This would be available to you. You would tab through it. The Open Accessible, and this is what's called a skip navigation link. If you download those accessibility requirements, or if you just search on accessibility and skip link navigation, you'll see a number of documents about this. It's typically a method used for where you have very complex or sophisticated media and you're attempting to meet accessibility requirements. Where you're in that gray zone, you get a little bit of latitude. But we'll talk about accessibility. There are some the requirements come in A, AA, and AAA. There's some requirements that are absolutely, they must be met. Alt tags of images, things like that. So I'm going to click on this open accessible version. And here, this is a fully tab enabled keyboard controlled interface. I'm going to just use my mouse, but you have the same stops. I'm going to click on this Destination Moon. It has the same descriptions, key stuff. It has a next arrow to navigate horizontally through. but I'm going to use the tab button to show you a feature. The alt tags that are written for these images, and you'll notice this is not the full equirectangular image of that panorama. It's been sliced or moved and cut so that I'm focusing on what is of interest in that scene, right? The staircase behind me is not of interest. So anyway, let me hit the tab key. You'll see this important part of accessibility is that you need to bring focus to whatever the current item of interest is. In this case, I hit the tab key. You see this box that's been drawn around this image. I'm going to turn on the voiceover just so you can hear the alt tag, and I'll let it go through all the way. And the cool part is that if you're familiar with alt tags, a lot of times you'll just write them as this is an image of the start of the entrance to an exhibit. A photograph at the start of the entrance to exhibit, but that's not really the way it's done. There's better descriptions they're verbal descriptions of it, and you'll hear it. And I think they're kind of cool. I'm actually thinking about trying to bring this back into the main tour, because especially when it describes the objects, it's kind of neat to watch. So on a Mac, you can hit Command F5 to bring up the voiceover.
Voiceover on Safari. Destination Moon Virtual Tour, Accessibility Mode window. At the entrance to the Destination Moon Gallery, a pearl-colored floor extends into a colorful room with high ceilings. 2 long walls are lined with exhibits illuminated by spotlights. At the far end, a floor-to-ceiling window with shades looks out onto a road outside the museum. To the immediate right is a large print of a moon crater with the words, "Group has keyboard focus." You are currently on a group. For centuries, humans
If I hit the
dreamed of
tab
flying
key,
to the moon.
it hops me to
In
the next one.
1960, voiceover off.
I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. The other item is like, how do you account for the hotspot? So if in this scene, there's a hotspot that opens the panel or the lunar landscape at the top here. In this interface, I have the ability to tab through. It'll tab me to that. I can activate that, and that will open that object. Same description, same information. It's in the hotspot. And from an assistive device, that really, if you try to make the virtual tour fully keyboard controllable, and this person wants to open the mural, if you're making them jump through the scenes, get to a spot, rotate the image, somehow activate that hotspot to open the image, that's not really, a frictionless event there. That's not really doing it. So this is an approach that's worked. It's kind of a dual one though, because I still want that full keyboard control over it. And let me show you, back to here, built into at least this one KR panel and a lot of Mac interfaces is some pretty powerful. I don't have it in here, but if you hit the Shift Command up, you can change the actual control, the size of the controls, right, up and down. That's a pretty major accessibility feature. But I will stop at that, because we'll have a full discussion about accessibility at some point. And I want to get to just the planned features, and then just transition to open it up to questions and answers. Is the things that I'm kind of challenging with right now is the textual information, all that stuff you see entered in there. Anytime that I have to retype it in, or it comes from a curator or from a subject matter expert, and anytime fingers touch it before it gets into the interface, then it requires, the big organization like the Smithsonian, it requires all kinds of reviews and editing, and that makes them nervous. On this project, something that we're using, you're using GitHub for. I was resistant to it at first, as everybody is who sees GitHub. It's kind of confusing at first, but if you use it, our process now, and we'll talk about this in a webinar on the Smithsonian, is I'll build out the virtual tour, in this case the gallery, to what I think is completion. It can never be edited fully until it's up, in its place. So it will get put up into a GitHub repository. It's kind of locked in at that point. They'll review it and edit it, but all the changes that I make from that point forward are under their control. So it's kind of nice in that I can hand the QA off to them and the content once it's done. The other thing that's kind of working on, or a challenge or something we can all talk about, is as you build out some massive virtual tour and you fill it with tremendous amounts of information, how do you keep people from being in a labyrinth where they're lost? And I'll show you this last thing that is kind of, this is actually another sneak peek of after the air and space is completed, I need to go back and redo the natural history. It doesn't meet full accessibility, and there's pieces of it that are 6-7 years old, so it's kind of having some issues. I need to redo it all in new code, but I wanted to, oh, here it is. I came up with a concept for the deep time exhibit, which is about life and stuff. And this is what's there. I'm working on this, so there's an issue with the image. I got the wrong numbers on the image size, but this is what's called the wall of life. It's the entire origin of life on the planet. It's got the mass extinction events and everything. In the dinosaur hall, there are 232 hotspots or interactions, things that pop up. And my idea is that you place them all on a single graphic. So no matter where you're at in the virtual tour exploring, like in a video game, you have that map or your inventory. You could quickly visually see what you have opened, what you haven't, what you've interacted with. And this has all of the videos and everything that are in here. We can talk about popping up videos, and this is running off of a Kaltura server. YouTube and Vimeo don't work for commercial accessibility things, at least not now. So I'm going to pop another one up, and this is one of my favorite, the giant sloth. This seems crazy looking. So each one of these is a standalone interaction. It's got all this text. You'll notice there's no translation. I have no ability to translate this text. Though it's text and it's entered in as CSS, it's not entered in correctly. It can't, well, that's not, I don't like to use that word. The browser can't see it, and it's not able to convert it over. So another reason, but the, tremendous imagery in here, super high resolution stuff throughout here, right? So you get in here and here's, each one of these interactions, you're doing stuff, you will quickly forget what you've done, but I would change these over to, if it's a video, it has a video icon. They would be placed along, along the timeline where they exist. Are they a land, sea? And so it would have contextual context to it. But that's kind of where I wanted to end, and just open it up to, so just kind of a recap, just kind of showing you broad level history of the Smithsonian, the current piece that I'm working on, the 2 best practices of like how to open up and display information, and then accessibility. And looking now for some questions, feedback that I can use to figure out what you want to talk about in the future webinars. So I'll open it up now.
Okay, I'm going to give everybody an ability to speak if they want. You're all currently muted. Just unmute and then ask any question you want. We should be able to do that with the number of people we have right now.
Hello?
Yep.
Hi, very impressive. The Smithsonian was one of the first virtual exhibits I ever saw when I got interested in this. So it's really a pleasure to hear from the creator. One of my questions that comes up is, what kind of time frames go with these various components you're talking about? Does it take you days, weeks, months?
The time frame is always, for the Smithsonian or for projects, I'm happy to say, is always dependent on their approvals and QAs and their processes. I definitely move faster, or there's a lot less overhead on my side. I've gotten to the point where shooting typically 2, 3, 4 hour blocks. I find that if you go for longer than that, you start to have problems. I was able to photograph the 8 galleries. They're probably averaging about 20 shots a piece. I was able to photograph those in a week's time. And so it's pretty fast. I mean, the tools keep getting better and better. So I definitely do use a lot of batch processing and macros and things like that. But yeah, they're not months anymore. They're starting to become pretty fast.
But what about post-production work?
Post-production work, I think stitching and probably, well, let's see, I'm producing one of these galleries a month. So, and I'm not working on them full time. So that's, yeah, post-production's not very long for me either. I like to use, I still use Photomatics for HDR, but I do some pretty heavy processing, playing around with, I've recently been playing with the Topaz sharpening tools and Luminar. There's two types of tools. There's the tools that like Photoshop Camera Raw or other ones that they do the equirectangular seamed image correctly. There's other ones that you use them and they just give you terrible seam problems. But there's some methodologies I've come up with over the years to, and I find that some of the more powerful post-processing tools are not designed for VR images. You just use them anyway and kind of paint out the seams and things like that.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, I would love to. That's an area that I think everybody kind of has their own, and I definitely don't think I have the best. It's image processing. How do you stitch? How many bracketed shots do you shoot? What, are you shooting dark and then, recovering in post? That'd be an entire seminar of how do you sharpen and blur and how do you process your images. Been playing around with one of the greatest areas of advancements is the nadir patching. You used to have to patch and painting out the tripod back in the early 2000s or something, when there was no content or wear or anything like that. You'd have bricks and things. It'd be brutal to paint those out. And I've recently seen what some of the AI tools, the open AI, I don't know if anybody's played with those. That'd be a fun one. They're Photoshop's content or wear fill on steroids. They're really something. But
I guess my final question, though, is time is also usually influenced by budget. So do they present you with a budget and then that influences how much time you spend? Or have you got the relationship set up in such a way that they understand you're going to do what you need to do and what it takes?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, a lot of this VR work is still, a discretionary budget, right? It's not what we used to call a program of record. So it's not something that they have a steady stream of money for. So they usually don't have as much as I want. So I'm usually having to control the scope of the project to make sure to remain profitable, because it's a business, that I'm not putting too much into it. And that's difficult sometimes to back off on things. When you work for a client like this, the upfront contract, I've learned so many less painful lessons over the years with like you shoot something and you didn't specify whether or not they want security cameras painted out. Or you show up and there's a construction crane that happens to be sitting in the middle of the museum, and you didn't write in your contract that, so now I flew out once to a place, show up and they're not ready to shoot, but I didn't have in my contract any consequences for it. So I got a free trip to a city.
Oh,
yeah. So
right.
the contracting and most of my mistakes have been not being a good business person, not the business side. They haven't been the artistic or technical or the virtual tour. Most of the times that I get tripped up on projects or things like this, is business side and contracting and scheduling out my work. It's good that you asked the time question, because you definitely want to always plan in contingency. I will never show up and do photography at a place with just one day. I always plan a day afterwards, and especially with this VR work, because it's so common, even now, to just mess something up, right? Skip a shot, bump the camera, I don't know, and then, and I always do stitch and check draft imagery on site before I leave. The other very big one is the shot list. Make sure, if you can, walk through a facility with the client, without a camera, and have a map, a floor plan of the place, and have them agree to these specific shots, and be able to say, hey, there's all these mirrors here right now, and I'd have to paint out all these reflections. Let's move over here, or the overhead ceiling fan that's rotating, things like that. Then you get to them to agree to that shot list, and if they deviate from it, then there's a cost.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'll get to Claire and Bob in a moment, but sort of expanding on what you were just discussing, one of the things that struck me is, well, you're doing KR panel programming, actual programming, which I do too, and you're doing a lot of custom work. And what I find is, in my case, a lot of that time, there's a huge amount of time that goes into programming a module. Let's say perhaps like the translation capability or something like that. How do you account for that? It's developed now for the Smithsonian, but you'll be able to use it on other tours going down the road. Who pays for it?
A good question. I kind of spread that out. I'll spread, and you're right, the modules, like if I've created a map module, let me, I don't need to pop in, but I typically will create like a map or editing tool. I'll go ahead and I'll pull one up. It kind of makes more sense. Let me just pop up let's pop this up. Okay, in this one at the top, you're seeing this, hopefully. At the top of the screen here, I just have these two little tools that I'm using for editing. And so I'll have the coordinates, but I have also this map that I'm using. Both of these pieces are just modules that I can add to, I can't be opening up different windows, but I add them just at the start as a single include line. So I have a folder called editing. Within that folder is the main XML, editing.xml. So if I'm starting a project and I want to pull in an editing tool, I want to place hotspots on the ground. And, I may have this tool that has the actual hotspot icon instead of this. Let me close this out. Instead of this marker that I'm using, this is like an editing marker where the Smithsonian will tell me, hey, there's you've got a bad lens flare right here. Let's edit that out. But they didn't say that. They didn't catch that. So it's okay. But you see the numbers here at the top. I just add that in. And if I'm starting a project, it's available to every project. I guess as you get more modules, as you get more capable, maybe your profit margin goes up because you're charging more, but you're faster. I don't know. I think this is definitely an area that's for our community has been a problem for me. It's been a weakness for me that I would think that these editing tools or these types of little widgets, that there'd be more of them, I would have spent less time trying to figure out things. I feel like I'm forging ground too much sometimes. I love KR Pano. I think it's wonderful, but if you don't have a programming background and stuff, it's kind of you get lost in it sometimes.
Mhm. Okay, so real quick, I'll get to Claire's question. All right, first one was, have you ever considered using like avatars or some sort of guides like that are virtual humans?
I have. Let me show you. I can remember it. Darn it. There's the KR Pano has the video drop-in hotspot where you can drop in the person. And I did a tour once where it was a helicopter repair facility. It was family owned. and the CEO wanted to have an introduction. And so he was filmed in front of a green screen, a short 1 minute, 2 minute, welcome to our factory. And then that was placed in the panorama. I forget, that was still, I think that was when Kohler was still around, and they had products for doing that. But that was really powerful, of having the guide. And that's something that I've talked to the Smithsonian about as well, is the nice thing about an avatar, when you start to do people, then you got to photograph people, you're dealing with photorealistic imagery. And sometimes it doesn't look right. That's why cartoons, cartoon figures will have 3 fingers instead of 5. So mentally you're not like, that human doesn't look right. But having actual avatars in there that lead you through, tell you how to use the controls, I see that coming. I really would like to see, I would really like to be able to do that, to drop, like in the Vietnam War exhibit, to actually have interviewed veterans, people who served in Vietnam, and they're available there to you. Is just a button to click.
Bob, if you want to ask your question, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate the chance to ask a question, and really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm curious, do you ever encounter any white balance issues in a large area where there's multiple light sources of different light
Yes.
sources?
Yes.
And I do a lot of work with churches and cathedrals, and I really have trouble making them look right, I guess.
That is a very difficult one. And what we do is kind of technically called architectural photography. And if you go look up how real architectural, well, we're real architectural, but how architectural photography is done, they cover the windows, they pull all the light bulbs out, they control the white balance. I found that, obviously we can't do that. In one of the, maybe this is like a tip or something, I'll go through, I try to shoot, like if shooting a cathedral over there, I'll either shoot it at night, so it's, all interior lighting, or try to shoot it when it's, like a good foggy, overcasty kind of thing, so you're getting good ambient light. But that, of course, you can't always do. I used to film hotel rooms and stuff, and you'd always have some big window bringing all kinds of sunlight in, and then towards the hallway you'd have all this yellowish light coming out of the bathroom. And I found a kind of a trick that kind of works for me a lot of the times, is I'll load the bracketed or the images. Suppose you're shooting with like a 16mm lens or something, so you got 6 up, 6 down at 45, so like 13 images. I'll pull those all in. I'll open them all up with Adobe RAW, and I'll do auto white balance on each of the individual images, right? So they're going to be corrected depending upon what the dominant light in that single shot is. And I find a lot of times, now you look at them and they don't look correct. But I find a lot of times in the PT GUI or some of the new blending tools, they blend that white balance out for you. So give that a shot. Take and just
Okay, thank
shoot
you.
a scene, load them all up in Photoshop RAW, and hit auto white balance on all of them. And I'm assuming you're shooting RAW, because you can't do that with JPEG. So pull all the RAW images up right when they come off the camera, and auto white balance in Bridge. I use Bridge, so I'm pulling up Bridge to do it, but they all use the same camera raw engine. But try that.
I will. Thank you for the tip.
Sort of along that same line, these interiors, are you shooting them HDR bracketed, or are you just shooting straight?
No, always HDR. And I found I've been trying to switch to I have a Nikon Z9 full digital, and I'm trying to switch to that, but I can't seem to get a lens that will stitch with the, I typically, with the rig I have right now, which is a D850, I'm using a Tamron 15 to 30mm lens, shooting at 15mm setting. It gives me about a 22,000 by 11,000 pixel image. But I can't seem to get the darn Nikon to work. Yeah.
Okay, technical issue. I see, I still have, Bob, your hand is up. Is there another?
Oh, no, I just not familiar with it. I'll lower it. There you
Okay.
go.
There you go.
Thanks.
And Thomas, did you have another question or?
I did.
Okay.
First of all, I saw an ad for this where someone forwarded me something through Facebook. I'm not a member, but you'll have my credit card as soon as this is done. This is just wonderful to find some people doing things. I wanted to share a couple of things. I just turned 60 and my midlife crisis took the form of trying to save us from climate change and the challenges of the Anthropocene. So I have just graduating with a PhD in geology, but my research has been on virtual field trips, kind of a workflow process, and then comparing them to in-person field trips as a learning modality. What I found is that the students doing the virtual field trips actually had predisposed learning gains that were greater than the in-person and were statistically significant. So I'm a huge advocate of this. I've had my own web design company for 30 years, and I've been doing this kind of stuff commercially for restaurants. But the academic world is just it's a completely different beast. My input is, my gosh, I'm mired in the accessibility wormhole. I'm down deep. And it's so important I'm doing work from McGraw-Hill, from my university. Any more information sessions you can do on accessibility for someone just getting into it, it's overwhelming. It is. I mean, it is. It's debilitating to try to meet with some of these standards. And then I just wanted to share. Are you doing this development? My research group, we've been developing for screens, tablets, computer screens, tablets, and smartphones, and kind of avoided like the plague for the last few years, VR headsets. But now, with that Quest coming out and those price points, I'm finding in my classes that almost half of my students either own one or have access to them. Are you developing for the VR headset? And I'm just amazed at there's really no established workflows for so much of this. You said you feel like you're forging new things. That's how I feel on every project I'm working on. And just curious what your experience is in the VR realm. And then the last thing I want to just share is what I found is, we did some early mock-ups, and in the education world with the younger students, you triggered me when you said something about the Smithsonian preferring function over form. And certainly for what we do, the function is important, but we're dealing with a generation brought up on Xbox and Sony PlayStation and Marvel movies. And we're really trying to jump into the gamification of education and how these things look at. If they see an older looking interface, they just shut down like we would when we see a web page from 1992. So just some thoughts I wanted to share and see if you have any advice to offer in any of those areas.
Yeah, I appreciate that. This does support the VR headsets. There's an icon that you would add. It hasn't been added because the Smithsonian, when it gets to VR, there's a lot of extra stuff that goes along with it. The hygiene, the cleaning of the headsets, a lot of the testing, the accessibility starts to get a little more challenging. What they call that photosynthesis, or the seizure,
right,
stuff like that. The air and space is a little bit different than the natural history. The natural history, they just gave me all of the information, all of the photographs of fossils and everything else, and just said, throw it all in there. The air and space is very controlled, and they want it to connect to their databases more than anything. So they want it to serve kind of as a portal. It's been interesting to see the difference between them. As far as forging ground, yeah, I guess we all are. And that's the importance of this community. It's so, I hear that you're mired in accessibility, and I have really struggled, and then I will find some tool or somebody will show me something, and it's really quite simple at that point. But yeah, I think this technical exchange, if you are foraging ground and you're coming up with good ideas, then you spread them, share them with people. So yeah, it's kind of a fun. And the just another quick comment on, you said the virtual field trips. We should definitely talk a little bit offline. During COVID, I had the University of Hawaii approach me, their instructional designers or educators, because when they had a number of what they call at-risk students that when they switched to digital remote learning, they didn't have any laptops. And one of the things that they did was they sent them out. This was a high school biology class, and they sent them out. We came up with using GoPro Maxes, and we would send the kids out with a GoPro Max, and we taught them how to make little virtual tours, and they would create virtual tours of their little, field trips by themselves and then share it with each other. And it was a big success.
Interesting. Yeah, one of my chapters is decentralizing the production of these. So, I'm part of a research group that builds these for education. And, we did something on the Great Unconformity and down in the Grand Canyon. So you can, a place we could never take students. That thing was for an academic world, that was an 18 to 24 month project, probably with close to $1 million budget and subject matter experts, videographers, all of that. And my master's was on that one, showing that the virtual students learn more. And all of a sudden you say, how do you get more of this quality content out there? Because these are productions. So one of my chapters was kind of trying to decentralize this. Can you teach students and teachers to build these? Obviously, nothing as robust as what you're doing, but good enough that they could be used for other students and teachers to learn from. So
yeah, I've had three case scenarios in the last year where I've because of COVID, I've been able to remotely. The University of Hawaii folks, I taught a course over 12 weeks. We would meet. That was like a full college course where they were taught from the ground up. I had a museum in Michigan, a small local museum that was closing, and they wanted to archive it. They had a person who he was a photographer, and I was able to, over the just through probably a few Zoom calls, teach him how to. He went and rented equipment, got a Nodal Ninja head. He rented that as well, and he created a tour of this local museum. And now they haven't embedded any information in it yet, but they were able to record it. It's definitely doable. You're starting to, the tools have matured to the point that you're starting to be able to teach the content, the subject matter experts directly how to create this stuff. And that's I'm seeing this with the Air and Space. The Air and Space, they like this virtual tour. They are going to use it. They're going to have a lot of value. And I knew that because they switched to all of a sudden, where's the manual? When are we going to have our classes? We want to start, they already want to change this destination moon. They want to move hotspots around and stuff. So
you're telling me on the business side, it's no different from web design. We held all the keys in the beginning. You needed us to make a simple change, and it's migrated to you program yourself out of the equation.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's constantly moving. Website design, computer animation, VR. They're all realms that if you stay at a level, you will become a workhorse at some point. So. It's a good, I don't have any formal training in academic applications of VR. I did a little bit with it in the Navy, and we had experiences where I worked on submarines and launcher systems, and part of our training was situational awareness. What do you do when an alarm under a certain situation? And we ran a test once where we brought in just the torpedo crew. I forget, it's like 16 people, young kids. And the reason that we had done this is our training, we were having more and more accidents occurring, and we had this big red team study, and we realized what you had mentioned, the kids, their actual brains are different, and the linear page turning, manual wasn't working with them. It wasn't really their fault. Their brain, their attention spans, they couldn't learn from material that we were producing. So we were delving into virtual reality, other types of, all right, let's produce something that they like, that they, will work with them. And we ran a test with virtual reality where we created just a simple mock-up of the torpedo room, and VR headset, had the crew come in and put the headset on, and then it would have audio alarms go off. This is a fire in this or this, and they would have to have some egress path or go a certain direction to get a breathing apparatus or whatever. And we were running them through these tests. We did that with one torpedo crew because there's 2 crews per sub. So the blue crew we did it with, and the gold crew we didn't. And then this was outside of their normal training. Then we took them to their normal training, got them onto the subs, and they didn't know, the crew didn't know which had gone through which, and had them do the live test.
That's fantastic.
It was night and day. The people who had done the VR, they just knew where to go. And that was a moment in which the Navy was, all right, we'll invest in this.
And the academic on my side in geology is now we're seeing professors using these before they go out into the actual field as a pre-learning environment. And you can tell the students that have done this, they're ready with their questions. They're not afraid of where is the bathroom, or do I have good hiking shoes, and where do I get water? It's incredible what these things can do. I'm sorry if I sound like a kid on Christmas morning. There's just not a lot of people doing this kind of stuff. And it's nice to talk and have somebody understand what you're saying.
I think there's more people doing this than we know, and that's kind of the beauty of this organization and trying to get it to grow. And maybe it's been centered on photographic VR, but it's a pretty big ecosystem, especially the applications. But I don't want to. Any more? What kind of questions we got?
Actually, if you can kick up your Q&A dialogue, Claire has a couple. You answered the first one, but she has a couple additional.
Okay. Am I manually putting in the desired hotspots? Yes, I do manually put them in. You'll see here I find that if you have a virtual tour and you've built it and it's like the natural history and it's working, and I've built it in a modular form, and I'm in XML, I'm in a script and I maybe have 20 scenes. In the first scene, I've got these hotspots in and they're working. I'll just copy in the code, copy that section, the hotspot section, and paste it into the rest of the scenes, and then just go through those scenes. And I'll like I said before, so this is the navigation. It's an animated. It technically violates accessibility, but you can turn it off, so it's okay. So it's that Google things. I would have this as, instead of this marker, I would have this would be that circle. I would place them all over the scene, and then you can export out these numbers. So you can actually work faster in script, in putting a tour together. Sometimes you can use an authoring package to do the mock-up to see how it'll look. A lot of times with the KR panels, I'll just start with the default virtual tour that you take all your panos and drop them into that make tour. Let me see, what other questions we have? The question about the avatar, definitely email me about that, because I'd be curious about doing the avatar. That has been that guide, that visual. People get lost in VR pretty easily. If you open up, you'll see, like when I open up a scene, that's not a good one, but in this one, if I open up the scene and I have them just pointing at this wall and there's no hotspots or interactivity, you'll see some people that'll just stop. They'll get lost. They won't understand. They'll look, I don't see anything. Where do I go? And so how you drop a person into a scene in the visual cues is pretty important. I think that's it. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have one more question. Do you attempt to make these tours work well responsively so that people can see them to some degree on their cell phone?
Yes. Depending upon, I have a Facebook account, and you can look at the metrics on that. International use is typically around 80% mobile. And so it's nice to design for desktop, but most of the use is going to be mobile. So for these right now, they're kind of designed towards desktop. And on the Smithsonian side, when they're sitting in their desks and stuff, I'll tell you, they seem pretty comfortable with desktop, but mobile is really the one that I need to be testing for a public audience. And the new KRPano has a major or pre-release to a major update. One of the biggest features of it is the fluid windows that will pop up, the scalable fluid windows. And that's a big deal. But yeah, mobile development can't be ignored. And it's definitely different. That yeah, you can pop these up. Not this one, but the TSA tour. It has definitely been designed for the two different devices. This one hasn't gotten there yet.
Understood. Yeah,
What's that?
great. Thank you for sharing that, because I've imagined it's got to be considered, given what I've heard about the use of mobile for everything.
Yeah, it's definitely a requirement. And if in the for example, in the natural history, a lot of over the years, the technical bugs that I get reported are coming from mobile users, which either tells me that there's more people using it that way, or maybe I didn't develop enough for mobile. But when the client gets, because that's when you produce these virtual tours, you've even though the contract's ended, you've kind of got to be there in the background, because as new browsers come up or whatever, people will write the Smithsonian with some edit. They'll write me. Benefit to getting the tour into their hands and getting them so they can maintain and update it is that less questions that come to me as a help desk.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Loren, why don't you switch back to that the last slide with the schedule? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I'll just briefly, the next webinar is going to be kind of like this one, an open discussion. Before then, the next week or two, we'll send out a survey to the public, to general. Where are you at in this ecosystem? What are you working on? What are you interested in? We'll kind of use that to drive the discussion on the 27th, which will just be an open board discussion like we've been doing here. We'll have examples, kind of the best of the best. Then at the end of June, I'll do a virtual tour on the Smithsonian, and that'll be focused on the Smithsonian. I'll talk to the natural history metrics. I'll have, they give me the traffic numbers from that whenever I ask. It's kind of fun to look at them. I think they're one of the most, heavily visited and stuff. So it's neat to see over time, especially the COVID pulse. That's a neat one to watch or to look at. You can see how it's done over time. Then an accessibility one focused purely on accessibility. And then I think photogrammetry is fascinating. Let me show you. I'm just going to show you really quick, because this is I always like to play around. You always got to be experimenting. This is from the Museum of Shenandoah Valley, and this is doing the IVRPA, which is kind of neat, but Blender is a better way of doing it. This is a virtual museum, and it's photogrammetry, so it's photography converted into CAD. You have the video game style controls. So this is a neat control where you can move in or around the space, but you're inside this. So I can go down and look at the floor. I can go into the corners. So, but this is just created from imagery, from photographic imagery. And it's kind of a fun one to play with, but do a whole session on how, what's the state of this technology right now of photogrammetry. And this is kind of how the Matterport tours are done, the technology behind the Matterport tours, which you don't need to have. You could do it through Blender and stuff like that. And then after that, I don't know. We'll based on your feedback.
That was actually leads into what I was going to ask you about. Have you been looking at some of the tools of Unreal Engine, the game engines,
Yes, Unity and
and
Unreal.
3D rendering with the capabilities we have now of real-time renders, real-time ray tracing, as far as even, blending, bringing the two together from, your standard, 360 videography, photography, but also being able to load assets that don't stick out and actually are easy to, change over time, where you don't have to go back out and, recapture things, but you can adjust them and not really lose any of the, the realistic nature of, whatever tour you're trying to accomplish.
No, I'm glad you asked this, and I hope you're a member, because Unity and the skyboxes, the ability to pull stuff in there. Boy, if you could do your development inside of a Unity engine, you could build your virtual tour out inside that. Holy cow! I mean,
Yeah,
it would change.
that's what
Yeah,
I'm doing with
it would change
Unreal.
everything. Yeah, it would. Yeah, I've used Unity a bunch. I know Unreal is far more powerful, a little more difficult, but yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
what 90-something% of the games are from Unity, but that platform and the way in which immersive and interactive or just video games are made in a Unity development environment, if you could get the virtual tour into that, yeah, that would really open up possibilities.
Yeah, and it does make it, also what you were speaking on earlier about that transition to the VR headsets. It, obviously kind of makes that process easier.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, the VR tools support Quest and Vive and things like that, but I've always found them a little bit clunky. They don't always register the device. Sometimes the image gets, it's stuttering, it has problems. But in a Unity engine where you're using, you just export it out with all the assets, the hand
Sure.
control assets, it's bulletproof.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely be an area. I know it gets pretty advanced, but that's an example of where our ecosystem includes that. Immersive is not just photography. Obviously, immersive is in video games and the Unity engine, and how, the same way you design a game and drop a person into it, it's the same story. VR storytelling is the same. Yeah, good question.
Definitely.
Thank you for asking that.
Mhm.
Any others?
If you can pull up your Q&A again, Philip has a couple, or has a question.
Great place. Yeah, the success of the tours, they're definitely the numbers. I don't have too much insight into what actually occurs inside. I know that they definitely measure their success. The people I work with within the Smithsonian gauge it somewhat by their percentage of the web traffic. So it's not not the actual numbers, but if 100,000 people come to the Smithsonian website, do they go to the virtual tour? And so they look at what percentage of traffic they drive. They accessibility is a real buzzword for them right now. They definitely have a lot of overseas international audience. They're not the language localization or the ability to support languages is my idea of something. It's kind of inherent to the browsers. They don't formally want to do it because the Smithsonian at their level, language localization would mean they'd have to actually go and create the scripts to make sure there's no, because the Smithsonian's one of the, not a difficulty, but one of the things when you work with the Smithsonian, their product is integrity, intellectual and informational integrity. So their QAs, they don't want any misspellings or anything like that. I think as far as success, it may be for the Smithsonian, it may be not numbers as much as it is the visibility. They have a very big digitization program. They have mass holdings and they're trying to digitize them. This fits within that endeavor for them. I'll be honest, are VR projects profitable? Good question. Have you been able, are there proven revenue streams from VR? Are there cases of virtual tours that are generating revenues? That would be something to look at. A lot of times for me, they've been a sunk cost. Like the TSA headquarters, they produce this piece for corporate morale and stuff, but there's no return on it. So,
yeah, I have a question, because
Yes.
I run into this with some clients. You are doing, in the case of the Smithsonian, an incredibly detailed virtual tour. Many times my clients will say, well, why would we want to do that? Because then they can just take the virtual tour and they won't want to come to the, to the actual museum or whatever. How do you deal with that issue?
That's never been seen in the numbers, that if you produce a virtual tour, I think I would argue the opposite, is that the virtual tour is definitely not, the same thing. And if you like the virtual tour, I have to ask though, one of the other tour that's been up for a long time, before I answer this, is the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. That tour has also been up for over a decade. And I'll have to ask them about their traffic, but they've never said anything to me. And that came up maybe early on. Some people were talking about, hey, if we produce this virtual tour, people won't come and visit us. But I think it's more of like a marketing tour. If that was the case, then sending out a brochure with a really nice picture of the Smithsonian would do the same thing. They would be like, oh, this is beautiful. I don't need to go now. I've never seen that. That's I'll go look. I'll ask all of my clients. I'll take a thing. I'd be curious to see them. And I guess they should be able to see that in their traffic, that they have a steady attendance, and they definitely monitor their physical attendance at the Smithsonian. When they release these tours, did they see a drop? I'll ask them.
Loren, could I jump in?
Yeah.
So I owned a travel magazine in the state of Arizona, and we would offer our clients rich media panels, and we got this pushback all the time. If I put videos or virtual tours online, it's going to impact our sales. And the opposite is just the case. There are numerous white papers, and if I can find a link, I'll send them to you.
Okay.
But in the tourism museum world, it's the opposite. People are more inclined to visit in person once they've been teased in line. And then in the academic world, one of my projects, when the students did the virtual field trip of the Grand Canyon, we had hundreds of students in the test group, and I think it was 98% were more inclined and excited about visiting the Grand Canyon in person afterwards. So it's a common pushback you get from marketing people, but the data does not bear it out at all. It's actually the reverse is true. And I'll try to find some white papers that you can share with the group. Yeah,
that would be a good one to actually just throw up on our, we're going to eventually redo the website, and we'll massage things around, but that would be something that would be nice to have in a repository, because that's actually that's not pushing back. That's a marketing piece.
It is a marketing piece. Yeah.
You can say that, like, this is why you should. I do know that one area we could do a webinar on the Google Trusted Photographer program, and I've made a little bit of money at that over the years. It's kind of like you're in the fighting pits, it's cutthroat stuff, but it's a viable industry. We tried doing on that as well, and in that they're putting in street view or virtual tours of hotels and stuff like that. They're certainly not doing that because they don't think people are going to come visit their hotel anymore. But that's an area, that whole Google Trusted Photographer, of doing local restaurants and things like that. But
what they find is that it almost doubles the interest of people to actually visit, let's say, the restaurant or the hotel.
That's right.
It's a credibility, kind of a credibility thing. If you can virtually experience it somehow, that it's not just a pretty marketing picture that has been put up there but you actually can feel it more realistically. So that, from that standpoint, it actually increases traffic compared to decrease it. And I had one client actually put this in a really interesting way. How many times have you seen the Mona Lisa? Now, if you had the chance to see it in person, would you say, nah, I don't care, I've already seen that? Or would you want to see it in person?
Yeah, I was going to, I just remembered that the Google Trusted Photographer program, they have these metrics in there that if you add a virtual tour to your website, to your Google map listing, you increase your visibility by X% and stuff. And what you just said is true, that it conveys, the virtual tour conveys a sense of sophistication and professionalism, and people are more likely to come to your place just because you probably got your act together better. But that would be a good one to do a little bit of analysis on.
Well, actually, it would fit into another webinar that has more to do with marketing, virtual reality as a business, and how do you market yourself, and that sort of thing. So that would fit there really well.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
I'm sure that will be well attended by a lot. Okay, guys. I think it's a wrap up. Next one's going to be May 27th.
Yeah, we'll send something out, a survey of some kind before then, so we can frame the conversation on stuff that's of interest.
Thank you, Loren.
Okay.
Good
Yeah,
presentation.
thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody for attending, and we'll grow from here.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay.
Goodbye.